Welcome to today's class. We'll be going through Practical 2, Informatics 1B. This is the 2019 version, right? The 2019 Practical. It's going to be exactly similar to the one that you're doing. I didn't want to do the one that you're supposed to submit tomorrow because, I mean, what's the point then of releasing practicals if you can't apply your critical thinking to solve or apply what you've learned to solve the practicals, right? So that's why I chose the previous practical. So the Local Society for Puppies, SUP, has approached you to design and develop a visual basic application that will help employees to shelter or to employees of the shelter home to manage the various puppies they take in. So it's a puppy management system, basically. We are managing the number of puppies that we take in. Your program will need to work out how much it costs to keep their puppies sheltered during a certain period. Your program must be able to handle any number of puppies, right? Let's highlight that part, as well as any number of days. So we must handle any number of puppies and any number of days. You may assume that each puppy is kept at the shelter for the same number of days. So that means for every instance or for every object of the puppy class, they share the same number of days. So when a puppy is processed, the following information about them is captured. The name, you see, they give you an example, right? So that you can know what data type to use. So the data type to use here will be a string. And then breed, which is also a string, gender, which is also a string, age in months, which is going to be an integer. And then each day the puppy is weighed to determine how much food they have been fed. Your weight is going to be a double, right? Because it can be 14 point something kgs, right? So we're going to use a double for that. To work out how much food must be fed to a puppy on the day, the following formula, the formula is as follows. That's how to work. So basically, this would be our function here within the class. This would be the function. So in order to understand classes, right, let's talk a bit about classes. So with classes, okay, this is assembly. So in order to understand classes, right, we have to go back to record structures. If you remember record structures. So remember a record structure, right? A record structure is a way to structure or to group data, related data for that specific entity. In this case, the entity or the thing or the object that we're referring to or we're trying to represent is a person. Or you can just say, let's use student. It's a student, right? So what type of information is related to each student, right? Or what type of information would you want to store for each student? So maybe we can say, I want to store the name as string, and then maybe want to store student number as string. We have to use string data type, and then maybe, I don't know, what else can you store? Maybe we can say has passed the module yet. It's a variable that keeps track of whether the student has passed as a Boolean. So why do we have a structure? Why do we have this? What do I mean when I say it's a way of grouping related data? We're grouping related data because all of this data represents one thing. That's why we use a structure to group or combine these three things. Remember, in Visual Basic or in programming in general, in programming, you cannot do this. You cannot say private student. Okay, you cannot do this. Let's see, you cannot declare this like this, right? When you declare all of this, let's say you want to declare information representing a student, right? All of these three pieces of data. The problem is they are not linked to each other. You can't tell which student is which. That's why we have to structure it or group it into one and form a new data type called student. so that we can now come here and say private student, and then let's say this is student one, the first student. Then now we can say for student one dot, their name is so and so. Let's say Meliodas. So they say that's the okay. There's no semicolon in Visual Basic. Yeah, it's a thing of doing working with a lot of programming language. You end up mixing up things. There's no semicolon in Visual Basic. So student one dot name and then student one dot student number is equals to some number, right? Remember, this is also a string. And then student one dot has passed is equals to say true, right? Let's just say the student has indeed passed. So as you can see, all of these pieces of data, right, they are stored for student one. They are linked to student one. So we can also declare student two, right? Student two, like this. So we can have this data type or this record structure that we've created. It has in a way helped us define a new data type called student, of which all the pieces of data that are linked to that student will be grouped together. So that's in a nutshell, that's the whole point of the record structure. But then the record structure is actually what is called a, okay, let me do this. The record structure is what is called a, what is this? A data structure, right? Meaning that this is a this is an approach of representing data, of structuring data. So since we can structure data, what about functions? We cannot we cannot put functions here, right? We cannot define functions for that student. Let's say, for example, you wanted to create a function that calculates your semester mark, right? So that function that calculates the semester mark is part of each student's of each student, right? So therefore, I need to declare it within the record structure. Well, you can't do that because a record structure is what is called a data structure, meaning that it can only represent data or only variables. Another term for data, you can say variables, because variables they store data. If you think I'm lying, look at this. There's okay, me and the semicolons. You can see this is a string, this is data, true, this is data. So we are storing data. It's meant for only data, not calculations. So as you can see, plus another problem with the record structure, right, is that look at the piece of data inside the record structure. It's public. Public, you can think of it in terms of like a public transport. Everyone has access to it. So, for example, let's say we have a record structure that represents each APSA client, right? Let me show you the problem with having everything as public. So let's say this is for each client, we want to store the PIN as integer. We also want to store the password. Let me say bank account or account number. Let me just write in short, account number as integer, right? And we also want to store the balance as integer. So with the problem with this, right, is that if you declare it in this way and you make everything public, it means that everyone has access to it. Everyone who's part of ABSA, the ABSA company, right, who's using the ABSA bank card, which becomes a problem because if everything is public, that means anyone has access to it, even your bank balance, your account number, your PIN, all of those details are accessible on the internet. They're just a search away. You can just type, for example, you can just type Patrice Mutsipe's bank details, right? You can just type this on Google and then you get all of the details. People might say, okay, I don't really see the problem yet. imagine you have all of you're able to get those details. After being able to get those details, then you can just you can in essence you can steal from that person's account, right? Because you have the details. They are made public. They're free to the public. You actually don't necessarily need to be an APSA client. They're just public. It means the public can have access to this piece of information or piece of data. So after it being made public, that means I can go on Chrome, on Google, and then search. And then after searching, I get all of these details, and then I can update my bank balance. So now I can just say my bank balance, right? Let me just say me, right? Let's just imagine there's me. This is me dot balance is equals to Mutsipe Mutsipe's dot balance. So if Mutsipe had a balance of like 4 billion, right? Like this. Let me make it easy to read. So if Mutsipe had balance like 4 billion, that means I also have the balance of 4 billion too, because the information has been made public. So that's why record structures, they have certain limitations. Everything is public by default. So you shouldn't actually use record structures. The best tool to use is a class, right? We'll get to class. Let's get to classes, right? So with the class, you have this is how it's going to be declared, right? We obviously going to edit. All of this code is going to be typed for us to define the class is going to be typed for us. So in this way, I can say APSA client, right? A class is exactly the same as a record structure and class, right? So it's exactly look at it. It's exactly the same way as a record structure. The only difference is that with a class, things are private by default. So you can have private balance as integer. So the balance is private. So that's one of the main benefits of a class. Things are made private by default. And then if you want to access the information, you access the information via a copy, of which we call properties. So you use a property to access this balance. So that property will just make a copy of the balance so that you only work with the copy of the balance. You don't change the original. That's why you can go on your banking app and then you see the balance there. Even if you try to change it, that's only going to change the copy, not the original. So that's another benefit. And another benefit is that you can now declare functions, right? You can have public function. Let's say the name is uh, let's call it get balance. Let's say calculate. Let me say calculate, or let me say calc balance, and then I'm gonna say as let's say as double, right? And then end function. So we're gonna have this. You see now it's possible to add a function within this class. But then with the record structure, it's not possible. It wasn't possible, right? So you see the two benefits of a class. Things are now made private by default in a class, which means that things are secure, they are safe. You can only imagine if on you went to Moodle. Imagine when you went to Moodle, it shows all the marks for every single student at UJ. That's going to be a problem because now there's no privacy. That's why we have to make it private so that we can have privacy. So we have to make it private so that each student can only you can only view your marks, not the marks for everyone inside the institution or inside the bank, right? So that's the important part about a class. You can define subroutines and functions within the class and then call them inside your form. And you can create variables. So you can create all of these things, and then yeah, it makes it easier. It makes it easier to like restrict who has access and who doesn't have access based on this private, by whether we're making something private, protected, or public. In this case, you can see our function is public. It means that everyone has access to this function, which just calculates a balance. I was just using that to make an example. So we have our record structure, everything. We understand where we're coming from. We see the record structure there. That was the that's we had limitations with the record structure. It was everything was public, and you also couldn't use functions within the record structure. With the class, you can make everything private, and you choose who has access to it through properties, right? And you can also add methods or functions and subroutines within your class. So what is a class? So when we're creating this class, what are we actually doing? So when you create a class, right, you're creating what we call a blueprint. It's a blueprint or template of the object or the thing that you want to build. So for example, you can think of this in terms of architects, right? When they plan to build a house, right? They have to write the plan to build the house down first, and then they build the house or the object based on the plan that was written down. So it sort of mimics that real world approach of creating things. You first write a plan, which is a class. So this class is just a plan. That's all there is to it. It's just a plan or a blueprint or a template for us to build that thing that we want to build. And then when we have the object, right, this is often called an instance of the class. An instance meaning that it's the plan brought into life, right? So you've brought the plan into life. So that's why they usually call it an instance. So it's in terms of the house, right? You can say this is the house plan, right? And then this would be the actual house itself, the house itself. So this is, in essence, what classes and objects are for, is to 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 make a template or a blueprint of the thing that we want to build. In this case, the thing that we want to build, we use the term object because it's an object, right? It's a thing. So let me open Visual Studio so that we get started, since we have like a basic understanding of objects and classes. So as you can see, the the first thing that we need to conclude, right, or the first thing that we need to think of is, what is this project based on? So basically, what thing or what thing we're trying to build, right? If you look at here, we're trying to create an APSA client, right? That's the thing that we're trying to model for. It's an APSA client. So in our case, what's the problem statement? So this problem deals with various puppies. So therefore, the class that I'm going to have is going to be called puppy. I'm going to have a puppy class because it's a system, it's a management system for puppies. So I'm going to call it obviously makes sense for me to call it puppies. So I'm going to create a new project. Okay, so I already have it pinned. So Windows Forms app.NET application, right? So this is going to be zero practical 02's memo. So I'm just going to say informat, just so that I can remember, because I usually create a lot of projects inside that folder. So I'm going to call it Informatics Practical to Memo, right? So let's wait for it to load. So this is, you see, when a puppy is processed, you see, we are dealing with the puppy here. The first thing that you need to understand is the problem statement. You need to make sure you understand the problem before you can solve it. So let's create the class, right? So to create a class, you can click on Solution Explorer here, right? click on there, and then you should see your project. If Solution Explorer doesn't appear in your Visual Studio, you click View at the top, and then you press Solution Explorer. So since for me it already appears here, I'm gonna right click on the project name, right? Don't be clicking on the wrong things. Right click on the project name and then say add, right? And then go down and say class. You want to add a class. So we have class.vb, right? So let me use a magnifier for this. So we have class1.vb. I don't want class1.vb. I want to name my class puppy. So puppy, and then make sure it's up to you. You can just name it puppy, right? And not put the .vb and just leave it like that. I usually put the .vb. Remember, VB stands for Visual Basic. You don't have to necessarily put it, but then yeah, it's up to you. So I'm gonna click add, and then it's loading. There we go. And then don't forget, always at the top, you put your option statements. And don't forget to add comments. So option statements, right? So option strict on, and then option explicit on, and then option infer off. All right, so we have our class, the puppy class. So now it's time to get started and create our our variables, right? Or put in the data that represents each puppy, or the information that should be stored for each puppy. So we have this information, right? It says when a puppy is processed, the following information about them is captured, starting with the name, and the name is going to be a string. So I'm gonna go to my class and create my variables, right? I'm just gonna write the comment variables. They're usually called instance variables because they are part of, in order to use them, you have to create an instance of the class. So I'm just gonna write the proper name. So they're called instance variables because, like, look at what I usually try to do is I look at the choice of words being used to describe the thing. So you see, instance, what is an instance? It's the object or the manifestation of the plan, right? So it's the plan being put into practice, right? It's you building the actual thing. That thing that you've actually built is called an instance, or it's an instance of that class, or it's an object that got created as a result of that plan or that class or that blueprint. So variables, it means that these variables, they only exist when you create an instance of the puppy class. So let's create the variables. Remember, they have to be private. Don't forget that. So private, so name has string, right? So typically, what we usually do, right? You might not understand I'll show you what the underscore is for. So with the underscore, it helps the computer distinguish between the variables declared inside this class and the variables or the information that we're getting from the outside world especially when we create a constructor. So I'll show you that now. So we have a name, and then we have a breed. So the breed is also a string. So private breed as a string. And then we're gonna have the gender, which is also a string. So there's a lot of strings here. So private gender as a string, and then we have age, which is going to be an integer because months, there's no 1.5 months, right? So there's 1 month, or 2 months, or 3 months, or 4 months, or 12 months, or 24 months. You see, it's always an integer. So they wanted you to think about it and come up with the data type that you think is more would is most suitable for age, right? Especially since we are representing age in months. So I'm going to say private age as integer. So we have that, and then each day, right, the puppy is weighed to determine how much food must be fed, right? It's weighed. So that means you're storing the weight. And then, so since we're storing the weight, come on. Just give me a sec. Let me do this. So the puppy is going to be weighed, right? So the information that we're storing here is the weight. They're just telling you that on each day, meaning that the size of that array is the number of days. So private weight like this, brackets, because it's an array, is going to be weight. Let's think about the weight. Weight is usually in what format? It has to be a double because it can be 67.5 kgs of weight, right? 0.5, you see, it has to be a double. So double. Um, then we're going to say the size of array is, so that we don't forget when we, yeah, the size of the array is going to be n days. So we're going to have n days, and then obviously since it's n days, I also need to declare the size here. So I'm going to say n days as integer, because this will be the size of the weight array. So we have all of our data, right? All of the information we need, especially the data part. In terms of the functions, we're going to read more and then see what's expected of us in terms of the functions and the subroutines. So let's see. To work out how much food must be fed to a puppy on the day, the formula is as follows. So you see, we are working out how much food. You see, we are working out, we are calculating. There's calculations involved. So this means this can be stored in a function. So we just call the function that returns the quantity of food of which the puppy must be fed. And it's on that day, right? So we're gonna check. The formula is as follows. For every 500 grams or part of, if a puppy is 750 grams, this will be 2 times that. Okay, the puppy weighs must then be fed 10 special puppy food, right? So we can create the function for that, or we can store a variable, but I prefer we create a function. So I'm gonna create a function called let me see. I don't want to be I don't want to make the function name too long. So public function calc food. Let me just call it calc food or calculate food. Let me just write it in full. Calculate food, right? So the food that it needs to return, if you look at the if you look at the question, right? We are working with integers here. There's no 2.5 grams. It's just integers. So therefore, that's why I'm returning an integer, because that's the answer. That's the answer must return. Needs to be returned as an integer. So we have that. We are good to go. We'll come back to it when you have to calculate. I'm just declaring the things that are required for this class. So the special puppy food is sold to sub per whole kilogram. The user will need to inform the program of this, or the puppy's food, right, is sold per whole kilogram. So the user will need to inform the program of this price per kilogram. So we need to capture the price per kilogram, of which we're going to use to calculate the special puppy food, right? So yeah, the best thing to go about is to declare it within the class. So private price, right? And obviously it's a price, so we're gonna make it a double. So yeah, we need to be very careful when you're reading so that you know where to which information is going to be the attributes. Attributes, it just means it's the variables within the class. So when they're declared within a class, they're now called attributes. That's the OOP term for it. And then functions, when they are now within a class, they're now called methods, right? So let's read continuously. So each puppy's name, the weight, and what for the entire period. Also display the total food that was fed to all the puppies. The total amount of money spent to all the puppies must also be displayed. There's just a lot being said here. That's the problem. There's a lot being said here. So let's break it down one by one, right? So we have the puppy's name, total food for the entire period, blah, blah, blah. You must also display total food for all the puppies. So we are calculating total food here. So we need to calculate total food. So total food, when you look at it, right, let's see. Here it says how much food must be fed on the puppy, right? So here we're going to calculate the food. So basically this function that we use to calculate the food for the puppies, we're going to use that to calculate the total food. So we have that there. So let me see. So we need total food fed, right? So I'm going to create a function for that. We also need the total food fed for all the puppies. So I'm going to need another function for that. The total amount of money spent to feed all the puppies must also be displayed. I also need to create a function for that. So let me use a different color. So all of these will be functions. So calculate total food. Yeah, I prefer to use functions so that we just call functions instead of calculating using variables. And yeah, it's going to be cumbersome. It's going to be a lot of it's going to be untied. It's more simplistic to have functions. So let's create functions, right? So the important thing to pay attention to is what must you display? It says you must display, right? All of this information must be displayed. So it means that the functions need to be made public because the user must see the values, right? If the user didn't have to see or didn't care, we would have to make the functions private. But in this case, we have to make them public. So calculate total food, right? So this one just calculates the food, and then this function calculate total food, right? The total food, obviously, if each food is going to return an integer, the sum will also be an integer. The sum cannot miraculously be okay, this is the names are starting to be long now. So let me just say uh calc food, calc total food, and then I'm gonna have public function calc what's the other one? Calculate total food to all that was fed to all the puppies. So here you are calculating the total food fed for one puppy over the entire period, right? So basically over all the number of days, right? We're gonna use that. Is it the weight? Let me see. Yeah, let's see. Let me double check something. Calculate how much food to work out how much food must be fed to a puppy on the day, basically for each day. The formula is as follows. For every 500 grams or part of, if a puppy is this, then it's going to be 2 times this. The puppy weighs, they must be fed. Yeah. So the 500 grams, right, is how much the puppy should weigh. So you see they're using integers here. I should have actually paid close attention to that. But then yeah, they wrote the weight in terms of integer. So we have to store it in terms of integers. You just need to follow the instructions. I know usually the weight is stored as a double because I didn't pay that much of attention in this part. But then you need to be very attentive to the information that you're being given. So we have that out of the way. So now it's starting to make sense. So we must calculate the total food to be fed for all the puppies, right? For all of them. So for all the puppies. So for all the puppies, remember that this is one puppy, right? This is information that represents one puppy. So since it's information that represents one puppy, we're not going to calculate it here. Remember the array of the number of puppies that are there will be created inside of our form. So that's where we're gonna calculate the food that was fed to all the puppies in our form by calling what? The total food for each puppy and then summing it up continuously until we find the total for all the puppies. So we will need only these two functions. So we have that, and then we need to calculate the total money spent to feed all of the puppies. So let me see. Also, we are entering the price that's used to feed each puppy. Yeah. So that means we need to calculate the total price, right? And the price, obvious, is going to be a double, but let me just double check. Let's see. This will count as 2 times, and then so 2 times that they must be fed 10 grams of special food per pea. Okay, so I'm not sure about the total amount, how they want you to calculate that, right? So the total amount spent to feed all the puppies must also be displayed. Mm, okay, I think we won't need a function for that. I think yeah, we won't need a function for that. We just add up these prices for each puppy. Add them up, and then we should get the total amount spent. Yeah, we should get the total amount spent. So this is pretty much what you need. So let's add extra pieces of data, right? Or extra things that we need. Let's add extra things. So for example, remember what I said, an instance variable or the data inside of a class it should be private by default. Then you use what we call properties to tell the user whether they can access this information or whether they can only read this information or they can also change it, which means they can write to it, right? So there's three ways you can go about declaring property methods. So the first way, right, is this. You say public property, right? Like this. You just make it a property, right? And then you give it a name. So what I'm going to do is, since I've made them lowercases, right? It's an all lowercase. I'm gonna capitalize the first letter, and then I'm gonna say as it must match with the variable you're trying to create the property for. I want to create a property for name. So name is a string, so I must also say as string. And then I'm gonna say and property like this. I don't know why it's doing that. Yeah. And then I'm gonna say get, right? And then there we go. So when you just write it as property, when you say property only, remember there's read only, there's write only, then there's also property. So there's three ways you can declare property. So this first way, or this first approach, it means the user can do both. You can get the value and you can also update the value. If it's a read only, it means you can only read it. That means you can only access it. You cannot change the value. If it's a write only, it means you can only write or change it, but you cannot access it to display, right? So you might notice something very weird here. Let's see. Name is already declared as private name in this class. So that's the problem with this thing with Visual Basic. It doesn't like notice the difference between capitalizations, right? It just looks at the combination of characters. If they match, then it thinks you've declared it. So you see now it's confused. Like, are you there's already something called name. Why are you declaring something else called name again? That's where we need to put underscore so that it knows, oh, this is just name. It's now different. This underscore, it means that it's part of this class. This, it means that it's just the name of a property method. So that's why that underscore is very important, because if you don't have it, we're going to have errors. We won't be able to declare our properties, right? So we have this. So obviously here you would have return underscore name. And then here you would have underscore name is equals to the value, this value that's being passed inside your form. So let me show you so far what we have, right? So before we continue, let me show you how these property methods work. So I won't declare, I won't add buttons yet because I'm just testing, testing this thing out, just making a basic puppy, right? Just one puppy. So puppy, I'm gonna call him just puppy. Um, declaration expected. Why am I saying, oh, yeah, nah. That's the thing. I'm used to many languages. So I'm coding in assembly, I'm coding in C, I'm coding in C++, I'm coding in Java, I'm coding in C Sharp. There's just a lot. I'm also coding in Visual Basic. There's a lot going on, so just bear with me. So it's private puppy. No, the name is going to be puppy, and then the data type is going to be the name of that class puppy. So it works the same way as a record structure. Remember, this is how you declare a variable of the type of the name of the record structure, right? It's exactly the same way. The only difference is that now things should be private by default. Then you use property methods to decide who has access and who doesn't have access. So in this case, for name, it means the user, the client or the form, it has both access, right? It has both things. It can return or get the value. That's why we have this get statement, right? Statement, meaning to get the underscore name. But then remember that what happens is I declare this name here. This is the name I'm going to use inside of my form. So what happens is it returns this and makes a copy and then stores the copy inside this property property method called name. And the same thing applies here. It updates the value. You you update the value via this, and then it gets updated here. Right. So let me show you what I mean. So let's try something, right? Let me just say, let's just try to initialize the name without following the proper protocol. So let me say puppy dot. You see the only things that are available here. You see, you should be very careful. The only things that are available here is the things that I've told the computer that they should be available for my class. Calc food, remember it's public. Calc total food is also public. And then name, which is that property method, that property or property method is also public, remember. So that means I can make use of name. So I'm going to press enter. If you try to, don't ever do the spiritual thing. Don't ever do this. Don't say underscore. This is very spiritual because look, you must pay attention to your IDE. It's trying to help you and you're ignoring the assistance. Do you see anything that with starting with underscore here available? Nope. So don't do that. You only access through property methods. And then you say is equals to import box, right? And then you say enter your puppy's name, right? And then after the user enters the puppy's name, I say MSG box to output the message. And then I say puppy to access the message now. Come on. So let me explain these two lines, right? So when you see this one line here, what am I using here? I'm using an equal sign. So it assumes that, oh, there's a set statement inside here, of which there it is, which means it allows me to set the name, right? And then if I want to display, right? So when I'm displaying here, what am I doing? I'm accessing. So this line, it assumes there's a get statement. And if I check, I have a get statement. So I'm going to show you what happens when one of these things are missing. The functionality becomes limited. So let me press start. So there we go. Puppy's name, enter the puppy's name. I don't know puppy names. So let me just say Munchkin. Let's just say I want to call mine Munchkin. Press enter. You see, I did this on purpose because I wanted you to understand what's the most important thing to do. If you see object reference not set to an instance, that means you haven't created the object. So puppy at this point puppy is nothing. That's what it's saying. That's what it means. Puppy is nothing. So you must instantiate, you must tell it to create the puppy object first before you can use it. So I must say puppy is equals to new puppy, like this. So now I have what instantiated my puppy. I've told it to create a new puppy object. Then now I can use that puppy. Because if you just start asking for the name, which puppy are you asking for the name for? That's why it's moaning at you like that. It's like, okay, which puppy are you creating are you inputting the name for? There's no puppy that was created. So instantiate or create the puppy first. Then after creating that puppy, then it's going to initialize the values or the attributes for that puppy. So let me run it again. So enter the puppy's name. So Munchkin. Let's try this one more time. And then perfect, everything runs. There's Munchkin. That's my puppy's name. Okay, yeah, I use the message box, so that's why it should remember it must always show the form. So yeah, we have this, right? So these are the very important steps. Every time you have a puppy, you must instantiate it or create it. So now this is what we call a puppy object. Remember when we were talking about the house and the blueprint and the plan of the house, those would literally be the puppy. The puppy itself. It's like the puppy is now in your hands. You have the puppy. Then here in this line, you are naming that puppy and say, listen, you puppy, your name is now Munchkin. I'm gonna call you Munchkin. Or whatever name this person wants to call that puppy. So let me show you an important thing here. So remember, this is when you want to initialize your properties, right? Or initialize your variables inside of your class. I agree you use properties. But then if you want to set or to want to use an equal sign, you must have a set statement, this one here. So let's say you only have one, right? Let me say this. Let me remove the set and say this is a read only. Read only meaning that you only just get the value, the name. And then this name that you're gonna get, this underscore name, it's gonna be it's gonna make a copy, and then you can access the copy via this name called name. No pun intended. So you see now, it even tells you, listen, property name is read only. So there's no set statement inside of your class. There's no statement that says underscore name is equals to. So this operation is not allowed. That's why it's complaining there. If I remove that line, it's going to run perfectly fine. But then what if I do it vice versa also? I say it's a write only, meaning that you can only write. So that means I need to have a set statement. So value as string, and then I want to say underscore name is equals to value. So now I can set the value, but then it's write only. It means that I can only say is equals to, I can't display the value. I can't get it to display. I can't read it. I can only write. Listen to the names that are being used. Write only. You can only write. Read only. You can only read. That's it's as simple as it can be. So you see now this statement is no longer complaining because it went to my class and it sees, oh, there's an equal sign. There's a set statement. So I can set this underscore name to something else. But then it's gonna get to this line here and say, okay, you want to display, you want to read the value, but then there's no read here, there's no get statement. So what are you trying to do? So just keep that in mind. You you can you can have either one. You can have a write only or a read only, or you can have both features. In my case, for this practical, they were not specific. They would tell you in some practicals, um, they'll say the value should only be read, or the user can read and change, right? They would tell you in the practical. In this practical, they really didn't care. So what I would do, I'll just use both. Since they didn't specify exactly what should be done. Should it be read only or write only, or should it have both? Remember, when it's just property like this, it has both. I can both access the the name property, and I can also read, I can also write to that property, right? I can change it, I can update the variable's value because there's a set statement. I can update, I can output, but because I can see the get statement. I hope that makes sense. So we need to add property. You see, when you add a property method, right, it becomes a bright white color, right? It means that there's now a property method. These ones are still grayed out. So we need to add property methods for all of them, like literally all of them. So let's do that. So I'm gonna have breed and gender. So yeah, our code is gonna be it's gonna be a lot. So property breed. So I'm gonna call it breed like this in uppercase. As a string, if I recall, this should be a string. And then I'm gonna have a get. All you need to type is get, especially if you have property like this. But then with double read only and write only, it depends which statement should be used. So return underscore breed, and then here it's going to be underscore breed is equals to value. Right? And then I'm gonna have public property. What else is there? Gender. Gender, which is a string. Okay, so gender and age. So gender is a string, and then end property, and then get, and then return underscore gender. And then I'm going to say underscore gender is equals to value. And then I'm going to have public property for age, as we know that age is going to be integer because they said the age of the puppy is in months. So end property and then get. Remember, for this practical, you can use both. You can both read and write because they didn't specify. For other practicals going forward, they will specify that they should be read only. So that means you need to create a read only property. If they said it should be write only, or you should only write, that means it should be a write only property. There should be a write only property. So now we get to weight, right? The difference with weight is that weight is an array. So you see here, I was leaving it empty here because it wasn't those these are not arrays. But then when I get to an array, this brown brackets, I need to pass in the index, right? So what's weight, right? So weight. So I need to pass in an index. So I'm gonna say, let's say index, right? As integer. And then as so this weight is it's going to be an integer. If you remember, they said the weight is going to be an integer. So now the difference now, right? Remember, this is now an array. So I need to say weight, open brackets, I pass the index here to index to the array and then return that element to that specific index or position. The same applies here. When I say underscore weight, I need to say index for that index, at that specific index, initialize it to that value that's being taken in. And then I don't know, I don't know if they're allowing you. Okay, they didn't talk about constructors here, right? They didn't. I guess it's up to you in whatever way you want to implement this code. So what I'll do is I'll create a constructor for this. So we'll see with the construct. So we have wait, and then I need days and n days and price, right? So n days and price. So public property n days as integer, and then get, and then return underscore n days, and then underscore n days. I don't know why it keeps doing that. Okay, so price is what data type? It's a double. I'm not really sure yet. We might have to change, but then we'll see. Because the price is not clear at this point. Public property price, right? As double and property, then get, and then return underscore price, and then underscore price is equals to value. So we have all of our property methods, right? So the main important thing now that's left is what we call a constructor. So what is a constructor? So remember what I said here. We said when you say new, you're saying build or construct, right? These terms are interchangeable, right? Let me see how many. Okay, it's almost an hour now. Okay, so remember what I said. An object is the actual instance, right, of the class, or is the house itself now, right? So what happens is in order to create this class, right, in order to instantiate, right, remember what I said, we need to use the new keyword. So when you say, for example, new puppy like this, what is going on here when you say new puppy? So when you say new puppy, in essence, it's actually calling the constructor, or it's building. Remember, it's building the object, right? Or you can say that it calls or it invokes the constructor. So if you think about the word constructor, right? What does the word constructor mean? Constructor. So the word constructor comes from the word construction, right? They're similar. Those two words are similar. At construction sites, what are they doing? They are building, right? So another term for the constructor, we can say it's a builder. Is those builders at the construction site, they're building, right? So if this new keyword, whenever it's used, it constructs or it builds the object. So therefore, there needs to be what we call a constructor, a builder, right? That gets invoked. So a constructor is basically, like I said, the thing that builds the object, right? So, but how do we declare it inside Visual Basic? It's simple. You declare it like this. You say public sub new, and then you're going to say end sub, right? So remember this new keyword there is going to be used when we build the object. So so there's many types of builders out there, right? There's builders who get information from their clients. For example, you want the house to be this big, you want the house to have a fitted in kitchen unit, you want the house to have a fitted in shower, all of those things, all of those requirements, right? They're passed here as parameters. All of the things that you require, or the pieces of information or data that you require to build the object, they're passed inside the constructor. So here, this is where we're going to pass our values, our data to initialize what? our instance variables. These things need to be passed via the constructor. Okay, except for the array, because remember the array, you don't pass an array, you just pass in the size of the array, then you redeem or resize, right? So let's create our constructor, right? Create our constructor or the builder to build the object, right? So public sub new and then end sub. So what do we want to take in here? I want to take in the name, breed, gender, all of these things. I want to take them in. So let me show you something interesting about an extra keyword, right? Something extra that you can, it's up to you. We have already used underscores, right? To distinguish which variables are from my class and which variables are going to be passed as parameters. But I could still be stubborn and do something like this and say underscore name as string. Remember this constructor the takes in data, right? For us to initialize our variables. Remember they are private, they can be accessed. So what a clever way to initialize them is when we are instantiating or building the object, or when we are constructing the object. Remember when we are constructing the object, the constructor is invoked. You see already it's already complaining because I've added name. Now it's like, okay, it's no longer empty. It's no longer an empty constructor. You need to pass in the name. We'll get to that. We'll get to the form. So I wanted to teach you something here. So we have underscore name. I'm referring to this one inside of my class, right? And I want to initialize it to the underscore name that's being passed via the constructor. Wait a minute. What's going on here? So the computer now gets confused. You will understand now. You start to understand why we need underscores, because it helps us distinguish from the variables within your class and from variables that are being passed via as parameters, via constructors, via functions, via subroutines. So a clever way to go about fixing this issue. Let's say you're stubborn. You want to use the exact same names. You could say me dot like this, right? It means me, me meaning this puppy class, my underscore name. You see, now it highlights in white. So now it means this one. You see, it's me inside. Basically, it's basically saying it's the underscore name inside of me. You see, inside of me. And then this one is the other one. So it automatically can detect, oh, so if this is you, agree that you're saying this is me. This is the name inside of me, right? So automatically it assumes, oh, the other one is the parameter. So that's why this color of the parameter it matches with this one. So if you're stubborn, you could do that. But then I just wanted to introduce you to me. So, but then yeah, I feel like it is important. The me you're gonna use it in some place you're gonna use it. So I feel like you should get comfortable to this. So I'll just do this, and you see now it highlights in a in a dark pink, right? To say that it's no longer necessary. You see, name can be simplified. It's just saying it's no longer necessary because they're not named exactly the same way anymore. So now I can just remove this because now it knows, because it can tell but with the underscore that, oh, this is the one inside of this class. And then the one that the underscore is the other one. So that's another reason why we need the underscore. Then I'm gonna say name and then breed as string and then gender as a string and then age as integer. And then, okay, wait, remember the wait, what I said, it's just an array. We don't pass arrays. We just pass in, we don't, the main thing we need is the size of the array, which is n days. How many days are there? So that's something we need to get from the user. Remember, you don't have to create a constructor because you have property methods to initialize these things. There's many ways to kill a cat. I'm just showing you all of the ways. So n days as integer, and then price as double. We might have to change the price, but then for now, let's stick to what we have. So it's a dark orange because we haven't initialized them. So let's write is equals to breed underscore gender is equals to gender underscore age is equals to age underscore n days is equals to n days underscore price is equals to price. And then we have initialized everything, right? So now another problem arises, right? It's now when you get here, you see our constructor. Remember what I said? When you use new, it's going to look for a matching new in your class. It's going to go there and see where's new, oh, there's new. So this is how it expects you to initialize because that's the code you wrote. But then since you might ask yourself, wait, we did code, it did work without this new, right? With this construct, without, let me show you. Let me cut this one out, right? And then let's go to our form. It starts working. So by default, every single class, if you don't provide a constructor, it gives you its own basic constructor. Because like I said, each object, right, needs to be built. You need to build the object, right? Each object needs to be built. So since each object needs to be built, if you don't provide the constructor, it will give you its own default constructor. So this is what is called the default constructor. So default constructor, it's going to give you the default constructor if you don't provide one. Because remember, objects are built, they need to be built. So we need a builder or a constructor to be able to construct or build the object. So I hope it makes sense. So we have all of these pieces of data, right? So the first approach that I'm going to use, right? The way I'm going to declare it is I'm going to include everything, all the approaches. I'm going to have a constructor and property methods of which you can do both. You can get the value and change it because the practical wasn't specific. So now before I even get to this line, right? Before I even get to that, I need to create what we call local variables. So dim name as string, because remember this constructor needs to take in values of variables. So that's why I'm also opting to use a local variable because I'm not gonna keep getting the name in other buttons, right? I'm only gonna get the information once. So dim as and then input box name. I'll just keep it simple. Name, and then we're gonna have breed and gender. So breed as string is equals to input box breed, and then gender as string input box gender, and then dim age as integer. Input box. Remember, input box returns a string. By default, it's a string, right? But then we want to get an integer, so we have to cast, right? Cint. But then we need option strict on to do that. To make it strict and force us to cast or convert on our own. And then option explicit on to declare our variables, right? And then option infer of to declare all of our local variables. So cint input box, and then we have age. So name, breed, gender, age, and then days and price. So dim um, days and price, right? So n days as integer is equals to c. There's something that we're forgetting. We haven't resized the array, right? We haven't used redeem. We're gonna get to that. I want you to shout it you so that you understand. For example, if you make that same mistake. So dim end days, and then we're gonna have price as the last thing as double. So I'm gonna have CDBL or convert to double. And then taking an input box and then ask for the price. And then you're gonna have the name in that exact same order. That's why I made sure to declare them in that order. Gender, age, and days, and then price. And then you see the error goes away after I fixed it. So now let me show you, let me comment this one out, right? To show you that it does initialize. I'm just gonna get the output the puppy name. That's the only thing I'm gonna output. I could output all of them, but then I don't want to waste time. So I'm just gonna output, okay, are you missing a return? Yeah, I'll return. It's complaining about my function not having a return statement. So Munchkin and then breed, I don't know, gender, let's say male. Age, they said in months, right? They say it's a young puppy, 6 months. And then end days, how many days do you want to monitor this thing? So to monitor the puppies, 3 days. The price 9.3. Well, yeah, it happens. You see, when you get this error, right? Conversion from is not valid. You need to use a different separate. If the dot doesn't work, then you must use an underscore. Not an underscore, a comma. If the comma doesn't work, you must use a dot. That happens a lot. So breed, gender, female, then age, 8 months old, days, 3 days. Price 9. Let me see. See, I'm using a comma now. 9, 8. And then my program works. Sometimes when you're getting a double, your computer settings might not be agreeing with, might not agree with what you've entered, right? So you see, I outputted the name, but then I'm using the puppy instance because the values, the information has been stored inside of my, the information has been stored or saved inside of my class via the constructor. But then there's something that we are not done doing yet. Remember, we have this array weight. So we need to redeem that array. So I'm going to write the code after getting all of the values, right? So I'm going to say underscore, I'm going to say redeem underscore weight, and then I pass in n days, and then I've resized the array so that when I use the array that side, it's going to work, because if it's not resized, the array you won't be able to use the array. So we have that sorted. So this is pretty much how you would use the class, right? So let me divide the videos. Let me just end here and then I'll continue the next video.